am climbing up the mountain, gonna find an answer. I am climbing up the mountain, gonna find an answer.
What about our cultural life today would not be if not for the counterculture of the 60s?
It's probably almost easier to do the opposite. I think almost everything changed because of the counterculture. Our sense of well-being, our sense of spirituality, how we get high, how we think about everyday life, how we think about love, how we think about our spiritual practices. I mean, the counterculture had a major inflection point in modern life.
I would love for you to elaborate on any or all those. You put an impressive list of things up on a slide during the presentation. Let's go a little bit deeper. I mean, what about love?
I think one of the things that I love is a book comes out. Everybody should read this book called Groovy Science. And these guys really broke it down by case and showed us how much of the ways in which we live everyday lives have changed. So when it comes to love, I mean both physical love and the emotional bonds we have with each other. I mean, people in the 1960s in the counterculture really interrogated what kind of loves were there, how do they mean, and what was the relationship between sexual intimacy and emotional intimacy. And people thought about those things publicly. And I think that was the breakthrough, that everybody kind of been feeling those things and worrying about those things. But suddenly we were able to talk out loud about them.
They brought it to the limelight. They brought it forward to the public conversation.
That's right. And I
public
think,
forum.
You know, and some of it was right here in San Francisco, you know, and it was men and women doing that. And I think that was another breakthrough, which is women's voices had not been heard very much. And the counterculture wasn't by any means impeccable about this. It was a male-dominated world. But women's voices were heard.
How did they achieve that?
I think by sheer chutzpah was a piece of it. But I think everything was up for grabs. So the kind of social scripts that said, what can women talk about, what can men talk about, you know, that was broken down in part by drug experiences and part by literally the collective physical experience of taking drugs together. I mean, you know, don't mitigate how important that was. Suddenly you're sitting there vulnerable to each other. You know, you get high together, you get vulnerable with each other in a way that I think getting drunk doesn't quite do. So I think that's another inflection point. Is like the ways we get high or stoned or intoxicated, they tell us a lot about the kind of consciousness we're interested in.
One thing I always noticed was they talk about marijuana being a gateway drug. And to me, it seemed like it was more a gateway drug because it caused you to cross that line into the black market, the underground. You're now doing something illegal. You're choosing to break the law. And so now you have a kindred spirit there with you when you're both breaking the law. You're both now in that underground.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. I think, especially in the 1960s, when maybe not so bad here in Northern California, but in some places, to get caught with a very small amount of marijuana could put you into jail for years. And so you were living in a place where you had to trust each other, right?
Snitches and all that.
Dealers had to trust the people we're buying from and vice versa. You had to trust each other. If you were going to get high in somebody's house, what did that mean? And it's a great phrase. Abby Hoffman of the 60s said, we're all living in an illegal nation. And that was a boundary point. Were you in that world or not in that world? Were you somebody who would cause someone to get arrested? Or were you someone who'd be, hey, you want to hit? And that was a solidarity that was really profound, in part because of the persecutorial nature of the state.
And you always knew they weren't a cop if they took a hit.
That's good. Right. And to test people.
So funny. Well, let me go back a step too. What inspired you to write this paper, to participate in the conference and present today?
So I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. So I'm like of the generation that sort of missed the 60s. I graduated college in 1979, so I didn't miss it by so much. So it's kind of like this shadow on my youth and my experience. And it was a profound decade. I mean, all decades are profound. We all live in a profound time. But there was something monumental about it. And I think I was always like, what was going on? Why did this all happen? What made these junctures so profound all at the same time? So, you know, I became a scholar and intellectual. I was like, this is a good place to ask hard questions.
So personal interest and the opportunity to delve into something that could go a lot deeper than maybe had gone before.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, part of it's vocational. right? I thought the people who've been writing about the 60s were basically folks who'd lived it, and their perspective's cool and interesting and important, but it's not the same as someone who's sort of looking at it from the outside, sympathetically often enough, but not always, and to be able to say, this is new territory to think about, and to see if it still has meaning. Is this something we need to still think about in the 80s, 90s, 21st century? So yeah.
Why do you feel it's important to have a conference like this and to rethink the counterculture and its relevance today?
The counterculture's kind of been the ugly stepchild of the 1960s, at least in the scholarly world. And I think for some reasons that are good, a lot of the people who come out of the 60s from the left were highly suspicious of the countercultural aspects of the 60s. There's some truth to it, that there was a kind of, I don't know what's the right word, not indifference, but a willingness to sidestep some of the hard questions about inequality in the United States. So, you could say the most profound struggle in the mid-1960s was the struggle for racial justice. And the counterculture, while sympathetic at times to that, just said that's not really our business. And I think that that left some hard feelings among those on the left who said racial justice is profoundly important, and to sidestep it is to have made a profound mistake. And so I think that sort of resonated in the countercultural studies of the next half a century.
Yeah, still today.
Yeah.
So your talk did focus largely on LSD and the psychedelic experience. What value do you think that brought to the table? How do you think that the psychedelic experience impacted the effectiveness of the culture?
I think without LSD, there would not have been a counterculture. So, I mean, it's that basic and that important a fact. And it's not that LSD, as we all know, instantly turns someone into a cultural critic and profoundly rejecting of society. I mean, as Timothy Leary used to say, set and setting matter, and taking LSD in 1967 is very different than taking it in 2017. Social conditions change, cultural meanings of the drug experience change. But I think in 67, when LSD was new for overwhelming numbers of people, it was this incredible hard kick that really forced people, and I do think that's the right word, I think the drug experience forced people to kind of look around them and say, what's artificial? What's real? What's genuine? What's not? What's a script that my parents laid on me, or my priest laid on me, or my teacher laid on me? And what is it that I see myself? And LSD, it has utility for that kind of exploration.
How can we tell what's real and what's story?
Right. I mean,
You got any insights, Professor?
we don't know. And LSD tells us that too.
Yeah.
That it's all kind of mirage that we're sorting our way through.
So if it's a mirage, can't we make it into what we want it to be?
Well, at least it seems possible, doesn't it? In a way that the sort of social conditioning tells us, like, it is what it is. Like that horrible saying, right? It is what it is.
Life isn't fair.
Yeah. And LSD says, like, yes and no. So the drug does speak to us.
Yeah, it does speak with us. So where can we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we take how do we use what we're now learning and exposed to from the counterculture to help us find a way forward through some of the challenges that we face in society?
I think the counterculture is, in some essence, a really hopeful period in the United States. Mm-hmm. In so much as, if you look at the social conditions of, let's say, 1968, it was a hard world. Injustice, racism. We could go on and on, right? The war in Vietnam, tearing literally people's limbs apart. So it's not like those were the days and everything was sweet. But people challenged those unpleasantnesses, those dangers, those horrors. And I think, again, the counterculture is a reminder you don't have to accept the terms of your existence as they were handed down to you. So I think that's the enduring lesson of that period of time.
Do you think they found a little taste of utopia for themselves and coming together that way at the time?
I think that they had the audacity to dream of utopia, which is almost enough. Mm-hmm. I think, people probably touched it once in a while. Mm-hmm. And then they learned that there's a reason that it's called utopia. It's asymmetrical. We're never going to find that reality.
There's still a real world.
But the struggle's worth it.
Good. Well, we're just grateful to be immersed in the conversation now, where we're legitimizing just by the fact that we're talking about it half a century after it happened. And I love how Dan Lewis put it. We're just getting to that period where we can start to actually assess the validity and impact of what happened then.
I think, for so many decades, and you still hear people talk about this, the 60s is this great divide. You can sort of tell who somebody is by how they respond to the 60s. If you hated it, you're a conservative. If you loved it, you're probably somewhere on the progressive side of things. Still true. There's a lot of validity to that. But it is a half a century. And there's kids growing up now for whom it's like World War I. And I think that's okay, because what it does is it enables us in some ways to step back enough to see, again, the improbability of those social struggles. Not to judge them so much, but to just say, like, wow, look what people did. That's amazing that people have that kind of courage to take on established truths, wisdoms, and unpleasantnesses and evils. And that's probably fine. That's where we should be. That's what history is good for. It's a story that we can tell ourselves that gives us a way to think about who we are now.
Well, one distinction I'll make between like a World War I as an example of a historical thing that we've just think of as so far back, is that the 60s movement left this resonating mark, literally a mark, tie-dyes. We hear the sound of Grateful Dead music, etc. So there is a through line, a thread that is still woven into the fabric of current culture that people can relate to, listen to, identify with, or even just recognize as such. Whereas, what are you going to pay attention to in World War I if you're not into planes or tanks or something?
I think you make a good point. And maybe the music is essential to that, but you're right. Some of the styling, the personal aesthetics are still with us. I mean, I'm always shocked that you can still play a lot of tunes from the 1960s, and an 18-year-old will know some of them at any rate. So there's something, again, why did that happen? What was it that created that kind of profound music? I mean, we still listen to Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart, and yet we still listen to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and we could go down a long list of the Grateful Dead. So again, there's periods of tremendous creativity that do endure in the 60s. You're right. More fair.
Well, it's cool because it gives something to attach to look at. Like I said, World War I is kind of this ethereal thing that happened that you can't really. You could watch a film on it, but we could still go buy a tie-dye right now. So I feel like it's alive and well. The hippie spirit, it's alive and well. A lot of those people are literally still alive. I don't think a lot of World War I veterans are alive by now, but there are hippie veterans, quote unquote, who are still around. We talked to them today, actually.
That's nice. And it's really important to capture those memories because, those are people now in their late 60s, 70s, even 80s.
The ones who are left,
Yeah, some of them are casualties of their own experiences. So you're right. I can see that.
Jerry Garcia maybe being the ultimate example of that.
Poor Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, 53, we were just talking about him yesterday and realized he was 53.
Yeah. He lived
oh my God, he looks 73, first of all.
He lived a lot of years and that was 53. We'll give him that.
But he's super young.
Yeah. He's not alone.
So, we appreciate your time in coming through and all that you brought to the table, and especially to come out from Kansas to share with us your insights and wisdom and what you've discovered along the way so we can keep the dream alive, so we can recognize the value of what came to us in the counterculture and recognize that it's still alive, it's still happening. And like I said, the value, if we embrace some of these things, openness we talked about earlier today, and just free love, not necessarily screwing girls in the park, but being open to genders and ages and
profound changes in intimacy and emotionality. I mean, our psyches are different because of it.
And that's what we love to keep alive today. And in that spirit, we always love to wrap with a hug too.
All right.